So we're going to be talking about SEO today, my favorite topic. My goal is to change the way you think about SEO. So if I achieve that, let me know towards the end of today or the end of my talk. If I don't achieve that, also let me know, because I got into some work. I'm doing this talk at like a few other conferences, so I'm going to need to figure that out by the end of the year at least. So how many folks in here are working on an SEO campaign, or you have worked on an SEO campaign? Oh, we got a bunch of people up front. So people who raised your hands, I want you to shout it out. Just name one thing that you did for SEO or you are doing for SEO. Anything? Content audit, awesome. Anything else for SEO? Keyword research. I hear title tags, metadata, awesome. These are all best practices. They are all smart things to do for SEO. The reason why I'm asking about them is because they are not the biggest lever that you have to drive your SEO success. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, when we're talking about SEO, we're usually talking about Google. We all know that Google drives the vast majority of searches in the United States, but it's getting competitive. It's getting competitive for the top results in pretty much every industry. I have a client that sells industrial water filters, and that's not so competitive, but there's only a few of those companies out there, so who cares? So what I'm trying to get at here is that since it's so competitive and Google's algorithm is changing with the introduction of AI, like we need new strategies, or at least to get up to date on what's working nowadays, what's working in 2013. 2023, what will work in 2023, if I said it. So for us as an agency, we'll work with 30 businesses. We work with like mid-sized companies usually. So we'll work with 30 a year. We'll do a bunch of things for the clients that we're working with. Some of the stuff we do works and some of it doesn't work. And that's super important for us to be constantly trying new things, because we need to be focused on what's working today. And that's what we're talking about today. So when it comes to like putting together these strategies, we really have to think about where Google has been and where they're going. And then we'll talk about what's working for us on the campaigns that we're working on. So now we get to see if this works. Sometimes the tech works, sometimes it doesn't. Yes, I believe it works. So Google founders, every time I put them up here, I have to kind of bow. These are my overlords because I do SEO for a living. So I mean, I don't have 3 private jets like they do, but at least I've been able to make a living by chasing them. So when the Google founders started Google, they were in grad school. And the reason why that's important is because it helps give you an insight into how Google works and where they're headed. Because they were in grad school, they were keenly aware of how academic scholars are evaluated. And if you think about it, like academic scholars, they do research and they write research papers. And at the end of their research papers are references. These are the papers that they read that influenced their work, that were valuable to them when they were doing the research. So because the Google founders were intimately aware of how academic scholars are evaluated, they understood that for academic scholars, if you have more of your papers referenced and cited by other scholars, you are more influential. You must be an authority in your space. You're going to get a promotion or a book deal or whatever. I'm not in the academic space. My wife is. But you'll get a promotion, whatever that means in the academic space. So what the Google founders did was they translated this idea to the web. On the web, we don't have long articles with references at the end, sometimes, but usually not, references pointing to other articles. Instead, what we have on the web is clickable links. And those are hypertext, anchor tag, links. I click on it and I'm magically on another page on the web. It's amazing that somebody figured out how to make that work. But what the Google founders did was they decided to use the link structure of the web to determine which pages and websites and brands are the most authoritative and trustworthy online. They were looking at clickable links on the web as endorsements of your website and your content. So the best clickable links would be a link from the New York Times, because the New York Times wrote about your company and linked to some article that you wrote. Google's algorithm would see that, and that page has a much better chance of ranking for the keywords that it's relevant for. So that's where they ended up. And when you think about it, what I just described to you is a rules-based algorithm. That's an algorithm where if I want to get more visibility, more customers, make more money from organic traffic, I need to understand the rules. And following the rules is what's going to help me to succeed with what I'm doing. It turns out my wife is very good at following rules. I'm the type of person where but I just want to know what happens if I don't do the thing I'm supposed to do, which has gotten me in trouble. But nowadays, Google's algorithm is AI-based. So because Google's algorithm is AI-based, instead of understanding the rules, it's important to understand how the AI is trained. Because fundamentally what this AI algorithm is doing is it's emulating like human decision making. And we're basically training this AI to make decisions about page or ranking pages based on the way a human would do it if it was possible for a human to read every page on the web and understand every topic and concept out there and choose which websites should rank. So I'm going to talk a bunch about how Google's AI is trained, and then we're going to get into what I'm recommending for SEO strategy. So before we get there, it's important to realize how Google's using AI. Google's using AI to understand what you're really searching for when you type a query. And so what does this query mean? What's the intent behind it? Google's also using AI to crawl the web. So what pages it should crawl, how often, and whether they should be indexed. And then Google's using AI to construct the search results pages. So based on Google's understanding of what you're really looking for, should Google show a map for this query, or some articles or product pages, or which ads Google should show? And when we're talking about Google's AI, it is not one big monolithic algorithm. So it's not the AI brain model where queries go in and results pages come out. I mean, that's the way we think about it and interact with it when we're searching for things in Google. But what's really going on is that there are a number of AI algorithms like natural language processing to understand the intent behind queries. And then classifiers. So you could have a binary classifier that decides whether a page is safe for work or not, or a classifier that's determining, is this page an article or a product page? And then also machine learning to understand what should go on search results pages that are displayed to searchers, and then also machine learning that can basically take in the behavioral data. So what did this person click on? Did they go back? Did they stay on that website, or did they hop back to the search results page? So those are machine learning algorithms that can generate the page and then basically learn as they go. So why is AI better? I mean, AI is better for Google than the rules-based algorithm because at the end of the day, searchers get better results. And that means a lot to Google because they want to stay in business and buy a 4th, 5th, and 6th jet for the founders. And then the algorithms can learn, which I think is huge, because you could imagine the earlier versions of Google where if they wanted to improve the search engine, they basically chain the engineers to their desk and ask them to improve the algorithm and come up with fancy ideas, test them all, very labor intensive. But imagine if those same engineers are building AI algorithms that learn on their own. And to a large extent, these algorithms can learn on their own. Super important when Google has a query it's never seen before, or there might be keywords that are trending, or keywords that mean something different because the market is changing for that particular keyword. And then also AI can operate at scale. We're talking about billions of pages and billions of searches online. And then faster algorithm updates because the algorithm can learn. And then last thing I want to mention is that these algorithms can be trained by humans. And super important since we want the AI to emulate, basically as searchers, and Google's really attuned to this, they're trying to build an AI that shows us what we expect and then also what's going to surprise and delight us. So if I search for insurance, I expect to see Geico. And that's what Geico basically has bought and paid for with it seems like billions of dollars in advertising payments. But also there's some insurance companies that might be local or might have a new product that Google wants to show because Google knows that those companies are trending or building a following or really delighting their customers. So how is Google's AI trained? The first part of this is that Google's engineers are choosing the signals that the AI will see. So this is all the stuff it's gonna, like the information it's gonna have about your brand, your website, and the individual pages on your site. So these are things like the metadata, the title, the backlinks to your site, how fast the page loads, and then also engagement with those particular pages. Do people go to those pages and bounce? Do people go to those pages and stay there, presumably because they got the answer to the question that they were looking for? So this is important that the engineers are assembling these signals. Oh, other things that I should mention is like business databases and licensure databases in different industries. Then from there, they're using humans. So Google calls these human quality raters. There's a quality raters guide that's out there if you ever want to volunteer for Google or possibly get paid to do it. But the reason why this is important is because these people are looking at websites and they're grading the websites based on how trustworthy they are. And so what Google will ask them is, here's a website. Does this website look trustworthy? Does it look authoritative? Does it look like the information is accurate? Is the information on this website coming from a trustworthy source, like a person with letters after their name, or an institution that you've heard of that conveys authority and trust to this business, to this brand, to this content? And so these people that are looking at websites, they are not looking at your website and deciding how well you're going to rank. Instead, what they're doing is they're looking at a bunch of websites that Google has selected, and they're building a training data set for the AI. And that's really important because a lot of times when I talk about human quality raters, people think like, when's the human going to come to my website and rate it for quality? And I want to make sure I do well so I can get rankings. That's really not what's happening. They're training the AI, and that's why that's so important. And one thing we can do, because it's publicly available, is Google's quality raters guide. It's 170 pages if you geek out on SEO like I do, but it's very telling because it just tells them what they're looking for in terms of quality websites. And if you think about it, it's really interesting that Google is telling them what to look for, but Google needs like real people to look at these websites to build this training data set to train their AI in the way that they want their AI to be trained to make ranking decisions. Now, finally here for training the AI is monitoring search behavior. And what that means is they're watching you search. Like privacy concerns, I guess if you're concerned about privacy, this is quite concerning. But they're basically looking at what did you type into Google? What did you click on? Did you bounce back to the website? Did you engage with that content? Basically, they're trying to figure out, did you get the answer that you were looking for? And you can imagine like Google has information from Chrome because there are many, many Chrome users, but Google also has information from the search results page itself in terms of what you clicked on. Did you immediately come back? Did you immediately come back to the search results page and refine the search and now go, oh, that's what they were actually looking for. So this data is fed into the AI, and the AI can learn. AI can learn the intent behind each individual query, and can learn which pages and websites people are interacting with when Google is serving them up. So a little bit about me, I buried this slide a little bit. So I've worked my entire career at the intersection of technology and marketing. So I studied AI in grad school, where I was building a search engine for the Department of Defense. What that was really about was take a picture of a plane that's flying overhead and figure out whether to shoot it down or not. So you can thank me for that. And I built a supercomputer for the NSA. It was a spy machine, so a $6 million machine. It's been declassified, so I can talk about it now. But it was basically calculating everybody's distance from a terrorist in terms of the phone numbers that you call. At the time we built it, we dropped it off in a parking lot in Northern Virginia with spare parts and manuals, and just never saw anything again until it was declassified. For the last 15 years, I've been working at my digital marketing agency. I run Fire and Spark. We focus on SEO, so we only do SEO. I like to say that every agency should really focus on where they're world class. We used to do a bunch of things, but now we just do SEO because that's all we can really say we're world class at. And we work with a bunch of clients, some of which you may have heard of. So I want to talk about dual content strategy. This is important as you move into like authority building for SEO. We're all aware that a big part of SEO is creating content and pages on your website and optimizing existing pages and new content for keywords. And we want these keywords to be the keywords that our customers are typing into Google when they're making a buying decision. So it might be the questions that they ask or the products they're looking for, or they might be looking specifically for the product or service that we offer. So that's keyword targeted content. In addition to that, there's authority building content. And authority building content is content that is in one way or another conveying to Google that you have an authoritative brand, an authoritative website, or this piece of content is authoritative, trustworthy, accurate in your space. And of course, we would love for these two to be the same thing. Sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's really, really hard. The point I'm making with this slide, and I'm going to give you an example on the next slide, is that when that is really difficult, it is okay to think of these two types of content as two different types of content on your site. The more related they are, the more relevant they are, the better. I mean, if you're selling medical equipment, but all of your backlinks and authority engagement are coming from some content you put up that's related to, automotive supplies or something like that, that's way too distant. But I'm going to give you an example here where they're pretty well relevant, where we did this. So we had a client that sells high-end 3D printers. These are metal 3D printers, $1 million machines that they would sell into aerospace and large manufacturers, or they actually sold a ton into education too, like higher education, where they're doing research around materials or machines or various different things. So it turns out there are not a lot of people searching for high-end 3D printers in this space, as you can imagine. So there are opportunities to create content, but just not that many people are searching for it. But it turns out that those people who are searching are pretty darn valuable to this company. So we did create that content. And what we wanted to do in terms of authority was create backlinks, engagement, and then also show Google like the institutions and organizations that we're affiliated with. We did some of that as basically as much as we could do in this high-end 3D printing space. But in addition to that, we started building out content for a different related space, which was 3D printing hobbyists. These are people who basically, they'll build their own 3D printer and they'll hack the software for their 3D printer and they'll complain to the manufacturer about, why this thing isn't working because they wanted to modify it to do this other thing. But what we found was that when we were building content and going after engagement in that DIY hobbyist 3D printer space, we were able to get a lot more engagement and authority and backlinks and all the good stuff that we're looking for to show Google that we're authoritative in the space. So we ended up with a dual content strategy. Like we built the content that we needed for people who were searching for a professional metal 3D printer or a commercial metal printer or an academic research 3D printer or something like that. But the authority that we were building for the brand and for the website that is basically going to help to get that content to rank for those keywords was mostly built in a related but different space, which was this 3D printing DIY hobbyist space. Before I move on, does this all make sense? Okay, good. So give that example there and we'll, almost worked. So I want to talk about multi-factor authority. I want to talk about fire department coffees. So this is a B2C example. What I love about fire department coffee is they basically make great tasting coffee that's highly caffeinated, so coffee with a kick. This company was started by Luke Snyder. Luke Snyder has a really interesting background where he served in the military, he was in the Navy for a bunch of years. And when he transitioned into civilian life, he joined the fire services. So he was a fireman. But he did a number of different things in the fire services. What's awesome about the business he created is when he made that transition into the fire services, He wanted some great tasting coffee with a kick to help him get through his days. Instead of searching online or going to Amazon like I would have done, he decided he was going to brew it in his kitchen. so he did, and he sold it to firehouses and folks that he knew, and he gave away the proceeds to that first batch of coffee to a camp for burn victims. This is a camp that helps firefighters and other folks who are dealing with injuries. So what he had there was a brand that was charitable, that was giving. Giving was built into it, and today they give away 10%. I don't remember the number. It was 10% of the proceeds, or whatever that number actually is, to charities that support injured firefighters and their families. So where he ended up, the reason why I was so impressed when I met him, is not only is he a super nice guy that you want to help when you meet him, but he was working full-time as a firefighter up until the point that he got this business to $10 million in revenue. So I couldn't imagine. But what comes of that is basically he's got an amazing story. And he was smart enough not to spend his marketing and sales dollars on advertising and PR and all the things you would normally do as like a consumer product brand. Instead, what he did was he put his marketing monies towards telling his story. And that was pivotal for him and his brand, because they were able to build a following. And that following was basically among influencers and websites and publishers that are in the veteran space, so they want to help veteran-owned businesses, and then also in the fire services, and they were able to get a number of backlinks and influencers that were working with like first responders, and so some of them were first responder unions and all of that good stuff. So what did Google notice? What Google noticed while they were building this engagement was that they were a brand that was building momentum. And if you stop and think about it, like the old rules for SEO have a lot to do with the way I think about it is bottom up SEO, which is that you're looking at Google and the question you're asking is, what are the best practices? What are the technical things that Google is looking for on my website and in my content so that I can rank #1 for the keywords that I care about? What they mastered without really thinking of it that way was a top-down approach to SEO, which is first they thought, like, what brand are we trying to build, and what is the right marketing strategy that is aligned with our brand that influencers would help to promote and amplify. And then also branding that our customers, starting with fire departments and first responder unions and departments all over the country, and military veterans would respond to. So they were pretty smart about it and came up with telling Luke's story. And they were able to show to Google through the signals that these campaigns created that they were a brand that was building momentum with their audience, or at least with an audience online. And honestly, building a momentum by building momentum with any audience is better than building momentum with no audience in terms of what Google's looking for. But if you think about it, like the AI is trying to understand what are people searching for, and it's also looking at your content, trying to understand, well, what keywords is this content relevant to? Like what questions and search intents does this content satisfy? But then from an authority perspective, Google's AI is trying to understand which brands and websites are accurate and trustworthy and authoritative in their space. But also there's this component around brands that are getting like uptick with an audience, with their audience. And you can think about like direct-to-consumer product brands, like, and I can't remember the names of them all, but there's one out there that makes mattresses that they deliver to my house, and I think they're foam mattresses, and I haven't tried one yet, but you unwrap them and they just match it. They kind of go like this in front of your eyes. But there are a number of brands like that have done really well before the pandemic and during the pandemic, and Google's AI is really tuned to pick up on that, and that's why this type of strategy works so well. But what does Google notice when, for the fire department coffee example, what did Google notice? And what Google noticed was what I call multi-factor authority, which is a number of signals that confer authority to this brand. So this brand is building momentum. And that's the engagement with the brand, backlinks, which were important in the beginning of Google and are still important today. And then mentions of the brand and reviews. These can be Google reviews or mentions or reviews in a number of spots. Reviews that Google trusts are better than reviews that Google doesn't trust. And then content collaborations and content partnerships, and then third-party endorsements. That's basically what Google saw for Fire Department Coffee, and the reason why Fire Department Coffee did so well when it came to SEO. When I was working with them, the majority of their traffic was coming from SEO, and they were ranking really well, or number one, for keywords like coffee of the month or bourbon infused coffee. Like those are really the bread and butter keywords for Fire Department Coffee. Now, when I interviewed Brad Flaherty is the CMO of Fire Department Coffee. I asked him what was the key to your SEO success. And what he said blew my mind, and I'm gonna tell you why. What he said was the connection with our community is definitely key to our SEO success. The reason why that blows my mind is because he didn't say, oh, Dale, we chased core web vitals, and that's how we were able to decompose or figure out Google's algorithm. Or we bought the latest and greatest SEO software. Or we hired a kick-ass developer who fixed all the HTML tags on our site, and that's how we were able to rank number one. If you think about it, chasing those things at a high level makes no sense. And I hate to say that as an SEO guy, because that kind of, when I say it, it almost invalidates a couple decades of my life. So I will, that's between me and my therapist, right? But what actually works for SEO nowadays is different from what worked when I started doing SEO. And if you stop and think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Does Google really care if your website is 100% correct when it comes to the HTML and the sitemaps and all that good stuff? When I look at a lot of websites, because we do a lot of SEO audits, and in case you don't know this, your website's broken. I know your website is broken because every website I've ever looked at is broken. It's just the truth. You think about it from Google's perspective, they don't care really. I mean, they want websites to be better so that they can crawl and index them easily, and their engineers don't need to spend as much time figuring out how to crawl and index your broken website. But once Google's able to crawl and index your broken website, I'm sorry, I'm calling your website broken, I'm calling someone's baby ugly, I'm so sorry. But the reason why Google is able to crawl and index your broken website is because every website's broken. They have to figure that out in order to do business. So really the key to their business is, like I've been talking about, understanding what people are actually searching for and matching them to the brand, the website, the content that's going to satisfy that query. That's all they care about at the end of the day, and that's what the AI is tuned to do. So when it comes to SEO success, we really need to be focused on customer intimacy, which is my way of saying, how well do you know your customer? How well do you know what they are searching for when they're making a buying decision related to your product? That's number one. And then number two comes down to creating the right content, which is the content, the topics, the keywords that Google is ranking for those searches that you're going after, that you've just discovered that your customer is making. And then the third piece of it is authority. So if you're not the only one out there that's creating that type of content, why should Google choose your content, your website, your brand instead of somebody else's? And that's what is working for us today when it comes to SEO. And what we found, because we look at everything, every 6 months, we kind of reset our SEO strategy. And I think to kind of sum it up, what we saw is we do look at technical stuff, because we have to make sure that when we're doing content and authority on one of our projects, that the website isn't so broken that Google can't crawl and index it. So that is important. But what we've seen is if we focus on the technical bits, we usually have the opportunity to increase organic traffic by 5 or 10%. And for some brands, like, that's the right thing, that's the budget they have. They might have significant traffic, and 5 or 10% is like significant revenue to them. So that is a viable option for a lot of companies. But the problem is, like, if you want to increase your organic traffic by like 2x or 3x, you really need to focus elsewhere. And that ends up being targeted content, targeting the right keywords, purchase intent keywords that people are typing into Google, at the right stage of the customer journey, and authority so that Google chooses your content. Any questions about that? I feel like Is that really clear? All right, good, because I might have said it twice. So so Google's AI is tuned to find the brands that resonate with online consumers. And the quickest way to this is really building content or a brand or something on your website that resonates with some community out there, even if it's not exactly the community you're going after, which can be especially hard in the B2B space. So the company you keep is also important. For a B2B brand, or what this looks like is, who's your brand associated with? For a B2B brand, I talked to you about a client that does water filtration. There are a number of trade organizations, magazines in that space. I'm making this up, but there might be one called Water Filtration Week. Wouldn't that be cool? But if you can associate yourself with those brands and those trade organizations that are relevant to you and your space, and basically hit Google over the head with the fact that you have these relationships, those are like endorsements for your company and your brand. And Google has access to a lot of information, as you might expect. But Google's able to look at like memberships to these trade organizations and licensure databases. And so what we like to do in our work is make sure that we're leveraging these relationships that brands already have and make sure that they're reciprocal. So if I invented a company today and put up a website, we'll call it like Dale's Dog Food, thinking off the top of my head, it would be easy for me to put like the American Veterinary Association logo on my website, but it's not true. So we love to make those the company you keep reciprocal. So there's a way that you're in their database, or you have that license, or you've got a content partnership that appears on their website, so that we're really beating Google over the head that this relationship exists. But that's another part of authority. Authority isn't just backlinks anymore. And also around the company you keep, like what we look at is like what I was mentioning is content partnerships and industry trade groups. That especially makes sense in the B2B space. And then event collaborations. If you're involved in events, we want to make sure that Google knows and make sure that your brand is also on the event site. And then other website trust factors. Like when I started doing online marketing, trust factors were things like the Visa logo. Because presumably, if you see the Visa logo, like my website is trustworthy and everybody's going to get, so if I held up a Visa logo, you guys would like throw your credit cards at me or something like that. But nowadays, like that was a long time ago. Nowadays, when we say trust factors, we're really trying to associate your brand with authoritative organizations. An example that I'll give there is we do some work in the healthcare space. So these are consumer-focused healthcare companies. And what we love to do is to make sure that these companies are affiliated with the Mayo Clinic and MDs that have letters after their name. It's hard to get MDs to write for you, so we usually try to get nurses who have letters after their name to write for you, and then when we hire an MD, we'll get an hour of their time for a lot of money. But what we'll ask them to do during that hour is to review the content on our website and give them feedback. And what that allows us to do is, instead of putting an author box at the bottom of the content, we put a reviewed by box, and we have an MD with the letters, Mayo Clinic, Tufts School of Medicine, whatever it is, but we're trying to associate this brand with those institutions and those individuals in any way that we can. So I like to believe that we're world-class at getting all of those trust factors onto the site. So those are things like an advisory board with people who are impressive, and any partnerships, events that we're associated with. Like we want to make sure that Google understands the company that the brand keeps. So when we're crafting SEO strategy, this kind of leads into how I think about SEO strategy. We want to think about a strategy based on purpose, which I call purpose-driven SEO. And the reason why I like to think of purpose-driven SEO is because it basically checks off all these boxes that I'm talking about in terms of the content we're creating, the authority we're building, and how we're trying to prove to Google that we are a brand that should rank well in Google. And the way we do that is there's a mission-driven approach. So a mission could be a social mission. It could be feeding hungry children if that's what you care about, but it doesn't have to be a social mission that's related to your brand that's going to drive our SEO. And I'm going to give you a bunch of examples on how we do it. Or purpose-driven SEO could be product-driven. So we worked with a company that manufactures wool, like wool products, like wool insulation is one of their big markets. Their wool comes from a couple specific farms in England, and they're very opinionated when it comes to how you raise wool, how you harvest the wool, how you treat the sheep, what you feed them, all of the above. And what's interesting is that was a way for us to really like create a purpose-driven SEO campaign around it. And a third way to do this is story-driven. And I gave you guys the example of Fire Department Coffee, where all of their marketing that got them up to, well, 90-something% of their marketing that got them to $10 million in revenue was, at the end of the day, it was about telling Luke Snyder's story of what he did in the military, how he founded the company, and how he was working full-time as a firefighter when I met him until they got up to $10 million in revenue. And when you meet him, when you hear that story, you just want to help him. Like, hey, how do I help you? Like, you know, if I help this brand to grow, I'm helping injured, wounded firefighters and their family. Like, who wouldn't want them? So he did an amazing job with that. That's a purpose-driven SEO campaign at the end of the day. So example I want to give you, this is an e-commerce site. And the reason why I love talking about this example is because I'll build an e-commerce site someday when I have like 10 minutes to myself. And when I build one, this is exactly the way I'm going to build it because this is what works. What iFixit does is they sell parts and kits and manuals and guides if you want to fix your own electronics at home. I studied engineering in school. My wife thinks that's very, very dangerous because I do house wiring with no training. And I fix electronics just to kind of see if I plug this wire in, is it going to smoke? Is it going to blow up? We've only had smoke and flames in the house like twice, so she has nothing to complain about. But this is like really right up my alley. And half of their website is product pages for the products that they sell. The kits, the guides, the spare parts, all of that kind of stuff. The other half of their website is advocacy for a cause that they care about, which is the right to repair. And if you don't know the right to repair, it's in the automotive space. It's about automotive manufacturers will release enough information about their cars and their increasingly complicated electronics and software that runs those electronics. They need to release enough information that I don't have to bring my car to the dealership. Like I can bring it to an independent repair shop, or if you're me, do it yourself, and maybe it works out. But that's the right to repair in the automotive space. In the electronic space, it's like companies like Apple. I don't know if you guys have ever been to the Apple store, but when I go there, they confiscate my wallet on the way in. And I know it's going to be a lot lighter when I get the way out. They're going to sell me like 5 dongles, probably a new computer, and then a phone, because I want an iPhone 3. But so that's the Apple store, where it's actually a big deal, the right to repair. So the reason why this strategy works for iFixit is because they're writing articles, they're interviewing people, they're following this cause online, which is the right to repair, and they're following it state by state, because a lot of this, the battle around right to repair is fought on a state by state basis. So because they're doing this, they're generating content, and it's content that other people who also care about this issue will link to, write about, participate in. They have content partnerships with advocacy groups, and it's not just advocacy groups, but there's a number of companies out there that want to, like it might be a chain of independent repair shops, like auto repair shops, that they can partner with that care about this cause. So that's how they're able to build authority for their website. And as they're building authority for the website, and this is a cause they authentically care about. It's a great marketing strategy, but it may or may not have started as a marketing strategy. But as they're doing that advocacy and building relationships among like-minded individuals and organizations, they're building the authority of their website. And what does that help them do at the end of the day that puts money in their pocket? This is a question for you guys. Rankings, that's huge, and sales, and they're selling kits to people like me. So the authority that they're building with the advocacy that they're doing is generating rankings and sales at the end of the day from organic. And that's how they make their money. Moving on to a different example. This is a product-driven example. This is a company that we worked with, Yum Earth. What's notable about Yum Earth is their candy is made from ingredients that are natural and also organically sourced. And what they want to do for their product-driven SEO campaign, or purpose-driven, product-driven Okay, so I'll write a book and I'll get all the terminology straight. But what they're doing is they want to help other food companies understand that they too can source natural organic ingredients without it affecting like the price of their products. And then another example here, this is a manufacturer. They're not in the room, so I don't know if this is recorded, but they're a boring manufacturer. There, I said it. And what I mean by that is this is a manufacturing company in Wisconsin. I was actually there last week, which blows my mind. But they're a manufacturing company in Wisconsin that makes Velcro straps, and that's all they do. And primarily the way these straps are used is to bundle wires together. So imagine this hotel when it was being built. There's wires everywhere that we can't see for electricity and networking and all that kind of good stuff. They're bundling those wires together, or the people who installed the wires are bundling them together so they're not, a hot spaghetti mess, with Velcro straps that are manufactured in Wisconsin. And that's what these guys do. The two founders are manufacturing engineers, so it's founded by the two guys, but they don't know anything about marketing. When they came to me, they were launching their e-commerce website, which is direct-to-consumer Velcro straps. And they wanted rankings and free organic traffic and make a lot of money and all that good stuff. So what I did was I was talking to them about how they're going to build authority for the content that they're building so that it will rank well. And what I found out, our process is we go through a bunch of questions like regulatory issues in your space, the problems your customers are having. Are there any villains in your space? Are there any companies you don't like? Tell me why. Things like that. And where we landed on two campaign ideas. One was I found that one of the founders of this company was volunteering at a trade school local to them in Wisconsin. And the reason why is because he wanted to help young people get into the trades. Like the trades are jobs that just aren't sexy among young people, but they're really good jobs, a really good career. So that's what he was passionate about, and he was volunteering nights and weekends at these schools. So what we came up with was a campaign that we called the Campaign to Recruit the Next Generation of Electricians. And that's one page on their site. And what we're trying to do is get the word out. And what that allows us to do was to reach out to influencers and organizations that were like-minded, that also cared about this cause. So we ended up reaching out to a group that helps previously incarcerated youth find jobs, and they cared about this cause. And then obviously like electrician unions, carpenter unions, like they're happy to link to this and amplify this message and promote the campaign. So that helps this boring manufacturer to build authority for their site. So what Google sees at the end of the day is a company that used to be pretty desolate or a website that used to be desolate when it comes to engagement and backlinks and all that good stuff. But it's finally getting some engagement and backlinks and mentions because they're doing something related, but not exactly what they want to rank for their keywords. In their space, when it comes to Velcro, yes, it would be better if they had links directly to that were from relevant websites directly to their product pages that are all about Velcro, but that's very hard to do for obvious reasons. So in their space, the types of links that we would be able to get from this would work very well. The other campaign that we came up with that we haven't done was related to ridding the world of disposable plastic ties, because their Velcro ties are reusable. Now you tell me exactly how people would reuse like the ties in the ceiling here. I haven't quite figured that out, but it's an interesting campaign idea. If we can get groups interested in it or interested in helping to promote it. So bottom line, why should your SEO have a purpose? Because at the end of the day, the purpose is it's going to help you engage with customers and to do your outreach. If anybody here has done outreach, email outreach for content partnerships or backlinks or anything like that, it can be quite a dismal experience in terms of response rates. And then also connecting with industry groups. It's one thing to reach out to an industry group and say, hey, here's what we're doing. We're one of a dozen companies that make Velcro. They basically have licensed the technology from whoever owns the Velcro trademark or patents. But we think you should like work with us or promote us or amplify our company or whatever. And that's very difficult. But also having a purpose will help you find like-minded influencers and work with them. And this is important. Like the purpose behind your SEO does not need to be a social mission. I don't know how many people in this room like legitimately care about feeding hungry children. Anybody? See, nobody. Like, I mean, that's crazy to me. It's like these kids are hungry, people. But anyway, so it doesn't need to be a social mission. I think when people start thinking about this, they're like, all right, yeah, Dale, I get it. Like purpose-driven SEO. What about climate change or sustainability? Or the problem with those types of missions is that they've been done probably 1,000 times, and you really need to hone it. Like you need to get more specific. We're working with a client that cares about mental health, because that's the industry that they're in. It's related to the product that they produce and that they sell. And so I think mental health is pretty good in terms of if you can think of a cause or a purpose behind your marketing and your SEO in that space. But what we ended up going with was mental health for first responders, because it just gives us a campaign that we can run that's just more targeted, that's more likely to get uptick. And what I think is super interesting is I also advised another startup that they build urns. Now, if you have a loved one that dies and decide to have them cremated and put in an urn, you expect the urn to look like an ornamental vase. I mean, I don't know. I haven't luckily had a lot of experience with urns. What they do is build modern, stylish, like the type of urn, excuse me, that I would be excited to display in my living room. And that's what they built. So we came up with a campaign that was around mental health for funeral home directors. That one came to mind because it was related to the other mental health campaign. But that actually worked well. So when you're thinking about like what your purpose behind your SEO campaign could possibly be, it does need to be authentic to your brand and your marketing. Because my hope, if you guys read between the lines here, is that you come up with a campaign that's helping with all of your marketing. Like when you spend your brain cycles on trying to figure out what the purpose behind your SEO is, why not benefit everything else that you're doing, your marketing, your PR, your content marketing, your advertising, like everything that you're doing, because this works. But it needs to be authentic to your brand, because it is something that you're gonna get behind. And then also it needs to be authentic to like the values of your company or organization, but it needs to be compelling to the influencers and organizations that you're trying to partner with to build authority with Google. And I'll show you towards the end here kind of the step-by-step approach I take when I'm putting one of these campaigns together. But that could be your founder's backstory, like we did with Fire Department Coffee. It could be the product craftsmanship. The example that I gave you there was the company that sells the wool insulation, and they care a lot about sheep. I mean, who doesn't care about sheep? You know what I mean? Like, they're cute. Or it could be leading your industry. The example I'll give here is we worked with a company that was selling handmade children's products, and they were aggregating from a bunch of sellers, kind of like Etsy, but not really. And what happened was the government was about to release a rule that said, if you sell even one children's product, whether it's handmade, whether you're going to make another one ever, you have to do $100,000 worth of lead testing before you can sell that product. So that was obviously very detrimental to the company that I was working with. But so what we decided to do from a marketing perspective and an SEO perspective was to lead the charge against this law. And that helped us tremendously, because what we did was we interviewed handmade children's products makers. We did content partnerships with other companies that would have been affected, and we led the charge. Now, a lot of times when people are thinking about SEO, whether it's keyword-focused content or authority-building content for SEO, people are thinking along the lines of, what type of content should I create? What article should I make next? What should the topic be, and what should the title be, and what keyword should go after? And what I want you guys to be thinking about, which is what's been successful for us recently, is thinking about it at a higher level in terms of campaigns, especially for the authority content. So this is a campaign to basically kill this law, or it's a campaign to recruit the next generation of electricians. We did one with a software company during COVID, I mean, not that we're out of COVID, I'm sorry, but we might not be. But we did a campaign that was a campaign to protect a million nurses, because they were giving away protective equipment for nurses, because that's what they did they created, and they were like, oh, this is an opportunity for them to give it away to benefit their SEO. But I want to think in terms of those higher level campaigns for SEO, especially for the authority building side. So when we're creating that authority building content, I like to think about it as citable content. And the reason why I call it citable content is because I want to create the type of content that other organizations that might be interested in nixing this law or also helping nurses or whatever it is, they will link to, mention, and promote our content because it's in their selfish best interest to do so. The example I'll give there is we work with a financial services company. This is a company that primarily they help their customers to send money overseas. So people who are working in the US sending money back home to family. And what we did with them was we did a whole lot of interviews, and these are interviews of immigrants in the United States. So these are interview articles where some of them are telling like really positive stories, some of them are telling negative stories, but they're authentic. These are firsthand accounts of somebody moving to the US and trying to make it. And what we did with that content was we reached out to organizations that care about helping immigrants in the US. And they're trying to make their own points related to a number of different issues that they're working on. And several of them were more than eager to link to and promote this content because it basically helped them do their advocacy. And that's what I call citable content. So for citable content, a lot of times we're thinking in terms of, next slide. A lot of times we're thinking in terms of interviews, like the example that I just gave you. Or it could be proprietary data. We did a project for cars.com where they have a ton of data in their database around who's buying what cars where. So we were able to build a bunch of content around their proprietary data. And surveys, if you have access to an audience to survey, and you can put together information that would be useful to somebody. We've also done like a manifesto or a position piece, and this works well if you're trying to, you're working against the law or regulation. The way I always like to think about it when I start working with a new client is what change do you want to see in your industry? Either regulatory or in your customer behavior or the way that businesses like yours conduct business, because there might be something there when it comes to a marketing angle for a purpose-driven SEO campaign. And then and opinion pieces, depending on what it is you're going after and what angle you've decided. This is super important. Some of you may have had, so I've done a lot of email outreach because I'm an SEO guy and I did link building. There was a time that I was building sites that I owned because my agency was a publisher when we got started in 2008. And I would send emails saying, hey, look how awesome our products are. And people would link to it because that's what people did 1 or 2 decades ago. And then when that stopped working, we moved towards creating awesome content. We called it 10x content. So content that is so much better than what else is out there that people would actually link to it. And that like worked until a year or two ago. What started happening a year or two ago is usually when you send that type of email, people ignore it, right? They don't even see it. It goes in their spam or they just delete it. If they do look at it and they respond, they're asking for money. Because the types of links that I used to get back in the day when I started doing SEO, those links are like really, really hard to get nowadays. So in order to get like some positive response to the emails that we're sending out, we're pitching the purpose. And this works for us because we have a purpose-driven SEO campaign. So you can imagine, like I said, there are organizations that care about the purpose that we chose, or it might be a first responder union that cares about the purpose that we chose. And when it comes to backlinks, typically the backlinks that you're getting for SEO campaigns are coming from SEO agencies or your in-house SEO specialist. And the easiest links to get for SEO are really like what I would call like a low-tier publisher. And a lot of times those are websites that real people don't look at, so they don't have a lot of value. I had lunch with some Google engineers at a conference a while back, and they said, yeah, Dale, like when we see those types of links, we're tuning the algorithm to just silently ignore them, because we know that they're manufactured for SEO purposes and they don't convey a real endorsement of your brand and your content. They're not representative of a real world relationship where some organization is endorsing your trustworthiness or how you treat your customers or the accuracy of your information or something like that. So the AI, their hope is to build an AI that just silently ignores them as if you didn't have them in the first place. And I hope that's not my phone, because I just told that story about how I turned off my phone. If it is,
It is your phone.
Feel free to press the button and turn it off, because that is embarrassing. But yeah, that's my mom. We focus on pitching the purpose, and obviously that's a much more targeted set of outreach contacts that we're reaching out to for these types of campaigns. So when I'm thinking about putting together a purpose-driven SEO campaign, I'm starting with step 1 through 4. The first step is really thinking about who are the partners that we would want to go after. It's possible there's a number of different spaces that might work for you. With fire department coffee, the obvious spaces that ended up working really well were organizations that support veterans and veteran-owned businesses, and then also organizations and influencers that support first responders or businesses started by first responders and that sort of area. So we want to look for those partners, understand who they are, what they care about, and how we're going to think about building a community around our brand, our content, our SEO. And then from there, we need to choose our purpose, but it needs to be aligned with our values or aligned with our brand. It really does need to be authentic. So we're not just making it up, save the whales, because we think that that's going to work with these people or something like that. And then after we've chosen that, we're building citable content. So this is the content that the partners that we found are going to reference as a part of their advocacy, their work, the work that they do. And then we're connecting with like-minded influencers. This is the outreach or relationships that you might already have. We love it when the relationships are already in place. So we're connecting with like-minded individuals and organizations to amplify the content. And the hope at the end of the day is to demonstrate the signals that Google's AI is looking for, and to demonstrate to Google's AI that we are a brand that's building momentum, we're building a community around our brand. And then last slide here. So what I want to do at the end of the day with any SEO campaign is build an SEO flywheel. And the way that I look at that is, if I build the citable content that I'm talking about today, it's going to make it a heck of a lot easier for me to connect with like-minded individuals and organizations. And when I do that, I can't help but have an easier time when it comes to growing my organic visibility and growing my audience, getting rankings and all that good stuff. And if I do that, it will be easier for me to generate partnerships. And when I generate those content partnerships, real-world relationships, I can't help but have an easier time creating more citable content based on those partnerships. So it becomes an SEO flywheel that's building momentum. And over time, this is what we did with a number of the campaigns that I gave you as examples today. It gets easier and easier over time as you cement those relationships, build that engagement, show Google that you're a brand that's building momentum with an audience, and thus you deserve the rankings that you want. And this is what we call like earning rankings in the SEO space. And that is it for me. I do have a guide if you guys are interested in more case studies and the emails we use, some of the content we've created and all that good stuff. And that is it for me.